Well, the Bible has a lot of good information in it. If you can apply some of the information, it can really change your life. It can really put you on the right path. But it also has some information in it that's detrimental to people as well. You have to have discernment with what you're reading in the book, in the Bible. In the Bible, where you see the word God everywhere, that's a mistranslation by accident on purpose. The original word is gods with an S. It's always with an S. When you back engineer the actual word, the translations, you find out it's gods, not God singular. Elohim is also a plural term. It's not a singular term. And you also discover that Yahweh is actually Enlil from the Sumerian cuneiform pantheon, from the Sumerian cuneiform text. He's Enlil. It becomes Yahweh in the biblical text. And there's all these correlations between the different ancient characters from the Sumerian text end up in the biblical text. And you find out in the book of Deuteronomy that these gods are fighting each other over resources and people. So if you read, anyone who reads the book of Deuteronomy begins to realize this probably isn't the creator of the universe that wrote this. When God tells people, God is supposed to be all-knowing, all-loving, ain't he the same all the time? Then all of a sudden, you read in the book of Deuteronomy and he's saying, there's one person in this city that doesn't like me. I want you guys to go over there. Now, keep in mind, they've never met these people. Kill the women, kill the children, kill their animals, and bring the spoils of war back to me. Now, what kind of God needs the spoils of war, and what kind of God needs to kill children? There's also a verse in there in the book of Deuteronomy where God tells a man, if you see a woman walking through the land and you decide to rape her, and the word rape is the actual word, look it up, you can. And if after you rape her, if you decide you want to make her your wife, you can keep her as your wife too. Now you have rape and abduction. Now, you're saying to yourself, the creator of the universe, okay, has all power, all knowing, omnipotent, omniscient. Why in the world would he write stuff like that, or give a man the ability to write stuff like that to put in his book? In some cases, it's not talking about the creator of the universe. We have to be able to discern that. We have to be able to have the eye to see that some of this is manipulation for the power of people to put on top of other people. In the New Testament, Jesus says, honor your slave master. Now, why would we want to honor a slave master? As you would honor me, he says. Do you think Jesus really would say something like that? I don't. I think that his message was pure and clean and clear, that he was trying to usher back a level of Christ consciousness back in humanity. And that's the return. The second return is when we all reach a level of Christ consciousness. That's when Jesus comes back. He comes back in our minds, not in a physical form. And for people to take his words and skewer it around to make it okay for slavery, I think that's a big thing where we see now the injection of human minds, not the creator of the universe. So you have to be discerning with the biblical text.
Who is Jesus to you? In your eyes, who is Jesus?
His name is Yeshua, okay? Jesus is, first the J is a recent letter. The J is not that old. So it really was originally Isus, and that name Isus means hail Zeus, okay? So you're calling on Zeus when you say Jesus, one of the Sumerian people who converted over to the Greek gods. But his name is Yeshua, and so Yeshua to me, very powerful person, very spiritual, high level of knowledge, a student of the Egyptian mysteries. When Jesus disappears from the Bible, he actually ends up in Egypt, okay? You can find this information in a book that was kept out of the biblical text called the Gospel of the Holy 12. And in the Gospel of the Holy 12, he shows up in Egypt, and we know that's a fact because I take people on tour every year to Egypt, and I take them to the house that Jesus lived in. It's a crypt. It's actually worship. People come there to see that bed that he laid in every single year. When I take people there, we take them straight there. And we know the path that he traveled throughout Egypt because it's a huge sign outside that Coptic church where he lived that shows where he went. Now, when he was in Egypt, what did he go there for? To learn the Egyptian mysteries. Who taught the Egyptian mysteries? Thoth, the Atlantean priest king, the person I wrote this book about. And so Thoth was the teacher of the Egyptian mysteries, or the ancient mysteries of what it was called. And then he leaves there and he goes to Tibet to learn Qigong and Reiki healing, which was confirmed by the Dalai Lama. And then he heads down into India to learn the mystic arts, teaching reincarnation all the way back. Then the Bible picks him up at the age of 32. I call my son out of Egypt. He shows up on the back of a donkey, proclaims himself to be the Messiah. So it's a big story. I think that he had a big message. I don't think people were able to grasp it at the time. But his message was that, not that he was coming back, but that the Christ would return, the Christ consciousness.
Where did you get this information? What book did you read that said this? Because this isn't, you didn't come up with this. You read this from somewhere. What did you read that told you this?
The Gospel of the Holy 12.
The Gospel of the Holy 12.
Another apocrypha text that was kept out of the canonized Bible.
Got it. And that's what you learned from this?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So let me ask you, there's a lot of people that, smart people, mathematicians, a lot of skeptics that are out there as well. How many people agree with what you have to say? How many people agree with this?
Well, I got 8 million people following my accounts across all platforms. I mean, I don't know.
So I'm not talking about that part. Of course, when you're talking with this level of firmness, there's a lot of that's why I'm curious. I'm curious to know how you come up with your beliefs.
Yeah.
But why is it, if that's what you believe in, more people don't believe in that? Why do you think such a small sect?
When you're born, you're given a name, a race, and a religion,
right.
And you spend the rest of your life defending a false identity. You don't know who you are. I don't know who I am. You were given your name. I was given my name. Who's Billy Carson? I didn't come up with that name. Somebody gave me that name. And then somebody said, get on your knees and pray before you go to bed. Say the Lord's Prayer before you go to bed. And so I got on my knees and I said the Lord's Prayer, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, But then when you trace back that Lord's Prayer, whose prayer is that? That's the prayer of Ptah. Who's Ptah? Ea Enki from the Sumerian tablets. He wrote that prayer in ancient cuneiform, which then made it all the way into the Bible. And you think you're praying to God, you're saying the prayer of Ptah. So we've been brainwashed. We've been programmed because for generations, we keep getting handed down this system where we're given this false creation of who we are, and we believe it wholeheartedly. We'll fight for it to the absolute death. People will die over those things that were given to them, not that they came up with on their own initially or originally. So it's a dangerous thing because we have a lot of people walking around that just took the programming code and they don't even understand really who they are, what they're all about. That's why so many people don't walk in their passion. So many people don't even know what their passion is because they've been given and told what their passion is going to be, and they have no clue how to find out who they really truly are or what they would love to be involved in or what their passion truly is. So we have a lot of NPCs walking around, non-players out here just walking around, have no clue, just programs in the matrix. But then you have a few of us that have discovered who we are, that are working on trying to go to inner space instead of outer space, dig deep within ourselves, learn how to walk in our power, find out what our passion is, maximize that, and access that power, and spread that power throughout the world.
Would you say your parents were Christians?
They were quasi-Christians. So they didn't go to church, but my dad would make me do book reports on the Bible from the time I was a little kid. My mother would make me say the prayers, So in that way, they were Christians.
When did you stop?
I stopped probably, I say, maybe around 12 or 13. I realized something was too much. There was too much contradiction in the text. Because remember, I'm doing book reports on the biblical text. And when I got to the point where God said, I create the good and I create the evil, do what I say at the Lord. That's in Isaiah. Then I realized something was really off here because I realized through my studies that God had killed over 3 million people in the Bible, and the Satan didn't kill anybody. So I said, wait a minute, something's a little off here. He's killing everybody, and Satan didn't kill anybody. And so we have to really take a look. And the deeper I dug into Deuteronomy, then I realized there's something wrong. What it was at that moment, I couldn't figure out, but I just knew something was a little off. I dabbled in it again later on to see maybe if there was something that I missed. And again, later on in my life, in my late 20s, I said, just doesn't make any sense. There's too many question marks, and every time you ask a question, they say, don't question God, don't question the Lord, blind faith. And I'm thinking, if I'm going to put all of my eternity into one book, if I'm saying this one book is going to lead me to eternity, and I don't know everything about it, every aspect about it, I can't question it, I can't dig deeper to get more knowledge out of it, then I think there's something wrong with that. I think there's something being hidden from me. And I'd rather be able to dig deeper, get more knowledge, get more understanding, versus people shunning me away from trying to dig deeper to get more answers. And I think that's a big problem. And I think the people that are shunning away and stopping you from getting those answers don't have the answers themselves.
When you went through this journey that you're going through, are your parents seeing you go through the self-actualization where you're having your own philosophies? Are they watching you, witnessing you going through this?
Oh, yeah.
So how old were you when they're watching this?
Pretty much from 7 all the way up. They gradually saw me changing. When I was 7 years old, I realized one thing. This is what's changed my whole life. My friends kept going to the ice cream truck. They had money every day, even though we were in the ghetto, poor, broke. We had nothing. We were getting money donated to us from local church and other people in the neighborhood. And we were taking showers outside in the backyard because we didn't have water on. We'd plug the hose into our neighbor's house. And I'm saying, how in the hell can they afford the ice cream truck every single day? So I go outside and I say to myself, there's got to be something I can do. I said, I'm going to go inside and get all my toys. I put all my toys in an old Winn-Dixie milk crate, and I went door to door. I violated my mom's rules about leaving the circumference of the house.
Yeah.
And I went door to door around the whole block. I squared the block and asked for donations for in exchange for my toys. And so I sold all my toys that day, and I ended up with like $13 and change. And I went to the ice cream truck, and I got my bazooka bubble gum with my comic strip inside of it, and I realized something. I said, wow, I'm going to save myself. There's nobody coming to save me. I am my own savior. And that changed my life forever. And that same
7
day,
years old.
7 years old. My mom saw me standing in the picture window of the house we were renting, and I had a couple of dollars in my hand. She said, what's wrong, son? I said, I don't belong here. I'm getting out. Was the Bible copied from ancient text regarding the biblical text and the ancient Sumerian tablets? Let's start talking about the biblical text. First of all, we're talking about the civilization that lived in Mesopotamia. Now, Mesopotamia is an ancient region which used to, in ancient time, encompass part of Africa. Now, due to the modern era and the redrawing of boundaries, you see where Africa starts, but Africa extended up into the Middle East in that time frame. And these people were part of the African continent. Over time, as Mesopotamia became Iraq and Iran and the Middle East, and there's a whole story behind that because we know that the Arabs invaded that region. They attacked, they killed a lot of people in order to subdue the land and subdue the area, including Egyptians. And this is not anything that I'm doing to agitate anybody, it's just a fact. They teach you this when you go to Egypt. I mean, the story is right there in Coptic Cairo. The Arabs came in and they slaughtered millions upon millions of Egyptians, and the rest who survived, they forced them to speak Arabic, which is why today most Egyptians have no clue how to speak Egyptian, and they also have no clue what their hieroglyphs actually say. Think about this for a minute. If your God is all-knowing, omniscient, omnipotent, all-loving, never changing, and all these terminologies that they like to tell you, and you understand that as to be a supposed fact, never question it. But then at the same time, you can be quote unquote cast into a lake of fire for all eternity for punishment and torment for sins that supposedly, according to that same book and text, you had committed before the foundation of the earth. In other words, you were born a heathen, you were born a sinner, you were born this and born that. You're told that you're this person and that you're that person and you're so evil, and then you're coming out of the womb as this evil entity before you even have a chance to form your very first thoughts, when in true reality, it's a big fear factor. And all you're doing is trying to save your own skin by following the rituals and hoping that in the end, it was accurate. You just took it hook, line, and sinker and said, you know what, this is what I gotta do because everybody told me I had to do it. And if I don't do it, I'm gonna suffer for eternity. So this is a big part of why I do what I do. It's about education, it's about awakening, it's about showing people that before you jump headfirst into something and stay with it for the rest of your life, maybe you should take a pause and drop some of that fear and start digging a little bit deeper, just so you can get a better understanding. And after that, if you still feel that that's the thing for you, phenomenal. Praying is phenomenal. I pray every single day. See, a lot of people think that I don't believe in God because I don't believe in religion. And the fact of the matter is, and I've said this 1,000 times, but some people are just finding me for the first time, I believe in a creator of the universe, of the multiverse even. Because why? My studies in quantum physics have showed me that there is proof and evidence that we are living inside of a creation, that there is a creator of all, and that this creation is imbued with divine energy. And that divine spark that created everything in the entire multiverse is in every single atom in my body. And because of that, I am divine and the divine is divine. So that means I am God and God is me. We are all God walking in the flesh. As a matter of fact, God is experiencing what it's like to be a human being in the third dimension, walking in the flesh through each and every one of us. There's only one entity. There's only one consciousness. We are all slightly different expressions of the same one consciousness. Separation is an illusion. Distance is an illusion. It's an illusion of the third dimension. Above the third dimension, distance doesn't exist. Time doesn't exist. The past, present, and future happen all at the same time. And there's oneness there, higher than the third dimension. It's something that we should all aspire to. And so I do pray, and how I pray is like this. When I'm happy about something, number one is I thank. I always give thanks. I don't give thanks and, oh, thank you, Lord, and all that kind of stuff, because the Lord is that's a whole nother podcast. But what I do is I give thanks. I say thank you with pure heart and gratitude and soul from myself to the creator of the universe. And when I am doing things like eating food or a meal, I command that the food be safe and healthy for my body. Now, I'm not going to command over a Hershey's bar. I'm not going to command over biscuits and gravy and collard greens, because I know that's going to give me diabetes. I'm not going to pray over a plate of slop. But if it's food that's good and healthy, I want to command that it's safe. In other words, that there's no salmonella in it, that there's nothing in there that's going to be detrimental to my body, no bacteria that was unforeseen, things like that. When I travel, I command that I arrive at my destination safely, things like that. That's my method of praying, knowing the end and believing in the end before the end. And why can I command it? I command it because the same power of commandment and the same power of control and creation is inside of my body. I have a fractal of the creator living inside of me. And so because of that, I walk in that power. And so I'm a walking prayer, and so are you. Everyone is a walking prayer. What is praying? Praying is looking to cast a spell. A Christian may not want to admit that, because they're gonna say, oh, that's of the demons and all that kind of stuff. No, when you pray, you're trying to cast a spell. When something goes wrong and you start praying, you're trying to say words outside of your vocal cords to an outside entity, but you're really speaking to the universe. And you're trying to get things to alchemically convert to your favor. It's a spell. You're trying to cast a spell. That's what praying is. But when you pray from a position of weakness, where you're begging, hoping, and wishing, and you're pushing out that low frequency energy into the universe, you're going to get more of that back. And so I pray from a position of power. And my position is thank you, unconditional love, and commanding. If somebody cuts me off in traffic, I don't get angry and start chasing them down and flip them off the middle finger and pulling out a gun and all this kind of stuff. I just say, bless that person. They could be in a bad situation. They could have got a phone call that their kid just got hurt in school. They could be having a medical situation. Their wife could be having a baby at home or something. Or they could just be careless. Bless them. Let them make it to their destination safely. That's how I pray. I'm a spiritual person. I'm not a religious person. And I understand now, through many years of dedicated research and traveling the world and studying, that the power, the true power to help and bless people in this world, and the true power to make a true difference and higher levels of consciousness availability, is only through spirituality. Because religion puts you in a box, and the box has a cap on it. And it only lets you go to the top of that box. And if you get to the top of that box, you're going to hit your head. After hitting your head so many times, you don't even jump to the top of the box anymore. You just stay down here. Spirituality is the key. Spirituality will give you enlightenment, will open your eyes to see things in different ways. It will give you inspiration, motivation, aspirations. It will allow you to be your true honored self. It will allow you to grow to be the person you truly can be. It will allow you to be born again many times. How does the ancient Sumerian religion differ from the Bible? Sumerian civilization was founded around 4500 BCE, before the current era, right? They wrote down their history on clay tablets, but the stories themselves were likely much older and passed down from generation to generation. We know this now for a fact because we found tablets that we thought were like the oldest, and then we kept looking and looking, and we found even older tablets with the same exact story on it. So these stories are actually tens of thousands of years old, not just 6,000 years old, right? So we're talking about a real ancient time. Another thing for me to point out is that the Sumerian civilization records start on average around 6,000 years ago, which is where the Bible got the 6,000 year creation story from. In other words, the Bible or religious zealots believe that the earth is only 6,000 years old. And the reason why is because it's plagiarized from Sumerian tablets, and the Sumerian tablets dated around 6,000 years ago. So to them, in their mind, there could be nothing older than that. And then that got passed down from generation to generation. The Sumerian civilization was founded, so the Sumerian history is about 5,000 years older than the Bible. The first written form of the Torah or the Old Testament of the Bible was not written until somewhere between 1,000 and 900 BCE. And so we look at one of the oldest parts, or some of the oldest parts of the Torah, which ended up becoming part of the canonized Bible. Not exactly word for word, but most of it in the Old Testament, majority of that, not all of it, but a lot of it comes from the Torah. And the Torah copied their information from where? Sumerian tablets. The Sumerians were polytheists. Polytheism is a belief that worships many gods as opposed to monotheism, which is a belief in a one God system. And so we know for a fact that the Sumerians, the ancient Egyptians, and many other cultures around the world who had their information plagiarized into the canonized Bible were polytheists. They believed in a multiple God system, whereas in Christianity, it became the one God system. Now, there was a situation that happened in Egypt a very long time ago. Pharaoh Akhenaten. Pharaoh Akhenaten is King Tut's father. Nefertiti was King Tut's stepmother, wasn't really his birth mother. Never could really find out what happened to King Tut's actual mom, but I keep looking and looking and looking. But either way, Akhenaten had began to worship Amen, Amun-Ra. Now, Amen told him, listen, there's only one God but me. I want nobody worshiping any of these other gods who actually were his relatives. These are the Anunnaki Atlantean people that were ruling over the lands all over the world. The Atlantean civilization was a global civilization. He says, you know what? I want you to begin to force everyone to worship me and give thanks to me. Okay, this is Amun-Ra. And so Akhenaten is like, well, what will you have me do, my lord? He says, the first thing I want you to do is I want you to begin to deface any of the gods that you find around any of the kingdoms. The faces and the bodies of the ancient Egyptian gods chiseled away. Under the order of who? Pharaoh Akhenaten. The beginning of the monotheistic era that he was trying to usher in, and he had amassed a huge following of people that were on board with him. This is where the Bible stole the information for the mass exodus. And when he leaves, he takes with him a huge mass following of people. That was the exodus out of Egypt. Why did the new Pharaoh chase him down, or the new king who was temporarily put in charge chase him down? Because he had taken the Ark of the Covenant out of the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid at Giza, and that was part of their power source. When he crossed the Sea of Reeds, not the Red Sea, he crossed the Sea of Reeds, a much smaller, easier to cross, and closer sea. That's where the water came crushing back. Now, when you read into the geological studies and look at that region like I've done on the planet, you'll discover that we can do a geological rewind of that area. And when you do a geological rewind based on computer simulation, we discovered that there, around that same time frame, there was actually a massive tsunami in that region. What does a tsunami do? It sucks all the water out into dry land. And then what happens when a little while later, the water comes crashing back? Yeah, and so that is the story. So Moses, in my personal opinion, most likely was Pharaoh Akhenaten, who took the people with him. There were no slaves building the pyramids in Egypt. We know this for a fact because their temples in the Giza Plateau region, we found all the actual tablets in there that talk about the workers. It talks about how much they were paid, and it talks about their medical benefits. It talks about arms that were broken, legs that were broken, people that needed medical help, medical assistance. You don't do that for slaves. You don't pay slaves. These people were not slaves. The Enuma Elish, when in the height, heaven was not named, and in the earth beneath did not bear a name. The primeval Apsu, who begat them, and the chaos, Tiamat, the mother of them both, their waters were mingled together, and no field were formed, no marsh was to be seen. When the gods, none had been called into being. You see how they talk like Yoda from Star Trek. Now you know where George Lucas got Yoda's dialect from. He got it from the Sumerian tablets. And no field was formed, no marsh to be seen. When the gods, none had been called into being, and none bore a name, and no destinies were ordained. Then were created in God's midst of heaven, Lamu and Lahamu were called into being. And so we're talking about here this Tiamat, which actually was destroyed in the Enuma Elish. And the water, it was a water-bearing planet, and the waters from Tiamat then became the separated waters from the waters, which made that into biblical text. And a new earth coalesced, or earth actually coalesced. Earth was actually a chunk of Tiamat. Earth was a part of this broken off piece that flew away from Tiamat and recoalesced with the waters that were already there, the organic material for life and everything else. It recoalesced as a planet, taking the third position of the sun, as Tiamat became the asteroid belt going around the sun. The asteroid belt is Tiamat, the ancient, broken, destroyed planet, through two planets colliding together. If you read the Enuma Elish, it also talks about the fact that because of that situation, Mars was formed. Mars used to be an actual moon of Tiamat, but it was slung into a very strange elliptical orbit around our sun. When you look at Mars, you see one side is charred and the other side is smooth. Why is that? Because the side that was facing Tiamat, when it blew up, a lot of that debris hit Mars and charred that side, and it also made it shift its pole of the crust about 45 degrees. More evidence that Mars used to orbit Tiamat. And also, when you do a geological rewind, you find out that it used to orbit closer into the sun, and that it was probably orbiting Tiamat itself. According to the Enuma Elish, the moon that we have did not come from a collision between Earth and a gigantic asteroid or comet. It came from orbit around Tiamat. As Tiamat was destroyed and became the asteroid belt, the moon, which we call our moon now, was tugged gravitationally along with this huge chunk that recoalesced as the planet Earth. But what's interesting is this whole text right here is pretty much almost identical in the book of Genesis. If you open up the book of Genesis and begin to read the creation story, you begin to see this virtual story without the moon and Mars, but the rest of it, you'll see it there. The Enuma Elish resembles a few parts of the Bible, especially Genesis 1, both being the temporal clauses. When above and in the beginning, in the ancient world, the sea was associated with chaos and destruction. The Bible includes a number of texts, battles and tames the chaotic sea, like Marduk battling Tiamat, who embodies the sea. In Genesis 1, God is already superior to the deep, which Hebrew, Tinom, the word's related to Tiamat. So we know in the Bible or in Hebrew that Tihom, is Tiamat. So Tiamat is mentioned in the Sumerian tablets, but it's also mentioned in the Bible as Tihom, which is the same name, but the same word. It translates the same as Tiamat. Rather than creating out of nothing, both God and Marduk create by giving order to chaos. Marduk, now why Marduk? Why is his name in there? Well, the original name is not Marduk in the original version of the Enuma Elish. If you look at the older tablet, which was discovered later, you find out that Marduk was not the name on the older tablet, it was Nibiru. And when Marduk was ruling over the earth, Amun-Ra, he decided to change the name of Nibiru to Marduk in a newer tablet, still thousands of years old, but not as old as the super ancient tablet that was discovered, right? Which for Marduk means creating out of Tiamat's corpse. In other words, Tiamat had been destroyed, and so now he's going to use that destroyed, all that debris to create planets and stuff in the solar system. Both God and Marduk separate primordial waters and place a barrier between the upper and lower waters. If you read the Bible, you'll see that's exact text. Both create luminaries to give light. Genesis 1 occurs over 7 days, and the Enuma Elish is told across 7 tablets. Then he says, on the 6th day, God creates humans, which Marduk does in the 6th tablet of the Enuma Elish. While God marks humans as special by making them in God's image, Marduk has man created from the blood of a slain God. God orders humans to work and care for the earth. Marduk assigns work for the gods to humans, and so the gods can rest. So basically, it's the same exact story. Finally, both the Enuma Elish and the Bible include stories about the founding of Babylon, which is Babel in Hebrew, including the building of a tower or ziggurat, which I talk about many times in many of my clips. The Tower of Babel incident, which comes out of the Sumerian tablets. But while Marduk names the city Babili, which means the gate of the gods, the Bible calls it the Tower of Babel or the city of Babel in Hebrew, which means to confuse. And we do know that at the Tower of Babel situation, where God comes back, who actually was Yahweh, who's actually Enlil in the ancient tablets. He comes back and sees that the humans are building this tower, and he realizes that, wow, they can do whatever they set their heart to do. That text actually made it into the Bible as well. And so he says, man's years shall be 120. So he had limited our years, which means a genetic modification, not letting us live too long. Because if we live too long, we get too smart. And if we get too smart, we realize we don't need to be working for these people. We can do everything ourselves. It's almost like AI becoming awakened. And so he destroys the tower, and then he separates the people, and he changes all of our languages so we can't communicate. That's why you have a lot of different languages on Earth right now, so that we can't communicate and collaborate and network as easy as we could. And that created a divide and conquer tactic, one of the very first incredible divide and conquer tactics that still works today. The Epic of Gilgamesh. Before the creation of heaven and earth, there was a void. Genesis states that the earth was unformed and void, with darkness over the surface and of the deep, and a wind from God over the water. Though not exactly the same, it implies a similar meaning to the introduction idea of the united heaven and earth. The Epic of Gilgamesh says the same thing. In Genesis, God existed before the heavens and the earth. The Epic of Gilgamesh's introduction is not entirely clear about the gods who existed before the separation of heaven and earth, but we know that they did exist because they talk about them all the time. So we know that the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is a huge story, and out of that huge story, which predates the Bible by thousands of years, you get the story of Noah's Ark, which is a tiny fraction of the Epic of Gilgamesh. And the Epic of Gilgamesh is taught in universities all over the world in ancient civilizations. Irreduced Genesis and the Great Flood. In the Sumerian version of the flood story, the gods decide to destroy the human civilization. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the gods decide to destroy humankind because they are being too noisy while the gods are trying to sleep. But in the Irreduced Genesis, they lack a clear explanation as to why they're really doing this destruction. It's just saying that, look, there's a flood coming. Enki, betraying the other gods, tells the protagonist Ziusudra. Ziusudra in the ancient Sumerian tablets is actually Noah in the Bible, of his plan and how to avoid dying in the flood. He instructs him to build an ark. And we found the actual Ark tablet. This Ark tablet is a real tablet. And this Ark tablet is a description of how to build the Ark. And the Ark was not like the one described in the Bible, which it leads to more freelancing again. The Ark was described to be had built as a round ship or submersible. And it had corridors in there. And the instructions were not to take two ants and two praying mantises and two lions and two sheep and two elephants and all the animals from all around the planet onto this boat, onto this round submersible. The instructions were to collect samples from your local area of your plant flora, seed and so forth from around the local area, and some of your local livestock. That's it. Ziusudra versus Noah. Both Ziusudra and Noah are instructed by one God to build an ark and escape the flood. But the decision to destroy humanity is made by one and one only God. So in Genesis, you have the Abrahamic religions who believe only one God exists. Multiple gods decide to destroy the earth in the polytheistic Irreduced Genesis. Now, when you read the Sumerian tablets, you find not only in Irreduced Genesis, but in other tablets as well, that these gods had collaborated together and that some of them did not want the earth to be destroyed, and they were begging to the leaders, Enki and Enlil, primarily Enlil, who had full control in decision making, and also Anu, their father, begging to them to please not let this calamity happen. And they decided that, you know what, the experiment here had gone wrong. The people had gotten too noisy, they had gotten too wild and crazy, they had gotten too intelligent. We want to just start over. And while this flood, which seems like a directed asteroid strike, while this flood, through whatever method they used, swept over the land and turned all the kingdoms into mud, they actually were on this sky ship crying and weeping, then loathing that their creation had been destroyed. Noah and his family remain human. After the flood, both Ziusudra and Noah are blessed by their gods, but in different ways. Ziusudra becomes immortal. So in the Sumerian tablets, the gods grant Ziazudra immortality by giving him some type of genetic mutation, allowing him to live an extended lifespan. Not necessarily immortal for eternity, but an extended lifespan. In other words, more than the 120 years. And when you look at it, then you see that Noah and his family remain mortal in the Bible version, right? In the book of Genesis, God establishes a covenant with humankind, promising to never destroy them again. The promise that God makes to Noah sets Abrahamic religion far apart from Mesopotamian polytheism. The Mesopotamians believed that they had to constantly keep the gods happy or else they would wreak havoc upon the earth, even when all their efforts, so forth and so on, were being met and unpredictable. The illusion in the biblical text that, we saved your family and everything's gonna be all good. But if you look at the story after the family's been saved and they're starting fresh again, right? It also says in the Bible that not everybody died. It also says in the Sumerian text, not everybody died. So Noah and his family were not the only people left. Read it good. Read your good book good. I know the book like the back of my hand. I know the book like the back of my hand. There were giants that survived. The Anunnaki, they call them the Anak. They survived the Great Flood. And there were other people that also survived the Great Flood. 2 people did not create 8 billion. There were people here already. Adam and Eve were just 2 of many that already had existed. This is basic bare bones biology, like biology 101. The thing that happened after Noah's family survived, they met other people, other survivors. They built a new civilization. They kick-started another civilization in that region of the planet. Other people were thriving in other parts of the world. But what's interesting is they go right back into the same old ritualistic things, trying to keep God happy, trying to satisfy God all the time by having sacrifices and this and that. They went back right into the same old system again. So even though the biblical text is trying to say that, hey, they just, they were blessed and they could start fresh again, not true. It's the same as the Sumerian version where they had to keep trying to keep the gods happy through sacrifices nonstop. So the debates is a text. It's a text that tells you the Cain and Abel story before Cain and Abel even existed. It tells you the Cain and Abel story. It reads it a little slightly differently, but it's the same exact story. The debate between the sheep and grain describes the primordial hill where the gods live. An, who's also Anu, right? The sky god creates 2 sisters, Ashan and the goddesses of the sheep, and Lahar, the goddess of grain. An creates these goddesses to clothe and feed all the gods and goddesses on the primordial hill, but they realize that they do not understand how to use their sisters' gifts, so they created man to feed and clothe the gods instead. Later, Ashnan and Lahar fight over which sister has the more meaningful gift. The story ends with the gods Enki and Enlil intervening in the debate and declaring Ashnan the winner. The similar story between, from the biblical text is the debate between Sumer and Winter. The gods create Emesh, Sumer for vegetation and the abundance of the earth. Aten, Emesh's brother, identified with Winter, was responsible for the fertility of livestock. When the brothers fight, Enlil declares Emesh the more important of the 2, and they reconcile after Enlil's ruling. The same Cain and Abel story over and over again. The 2 debates discussed above bear the most striking resemblance to the Genesis story of Cain and Abel, Genesis 4:1 through 4:16. Like the debates, the story of Cain and Abel involves quarreling siblings, but while the debate tablets discuss relatively insignificant events, the story of Cain and Abel is amongst the most tragic tales in the Bible, one of the very first recorded murders, right? When God appreciates Abel's offerings but not Cain's, Cain becomes jealous and angry. God warns Cain not to give in to his anger, but Cain does not listen and kills his brother Abel in envious rage. God punishes Cain by cursing him to wander ceaselessly. Now, what does he do? God tells Cain, you got to get out of here. And Cain goes, in the Bible, he says, but the people out there will kill me. So wait a minute. If you believe in the version that most people believe in of the Bible, you know that there's Adam, Eve, Cain and Abel, right? Cain kills Abel. So now there's Adam and Eve and Cain. Now Cain gets kicked out of the garden, but all of a sudden he knows that there's people out there. What people? That's in the Bible. There were millions of people already here. When Adam and Eve arrived here, there were already people here. Adam and Eve were not the first people on this planet. They were the first Homo sapiens sapien version, first genetically modified by the Anu, by the Anunnaki, to be able to reproduce in a certain type of way. The other people, a lot of them weren't able to reproduce in that way, and the ones who were creating a lot of rarities, giants that didn't have long lifespan. All kind of crazy stuff was going on according to these texts. When you look at the story of the Adamu, when Isis says, I'm going to take this baby to term and I'm going to bring forth the first one that works the proper way. And she takes one of the existing hominids, which was our cousins on this planet, takes the egg out of her womb and puts it into her own womb and takes it to term for 10 months. And then she gives birth to the Adamu, which means first man. That was Adam. It means that he was the first perfectly created man that can actually reproduce on his own, that had enough common sense and logic and wisdom and understanding to take orders, but also to think for himself. And then they tried to mate him with some of the other people that were there, and the mating wasn't working. So then they took some more genetic material from him, and then they cloned or recreated an Eve and had them mate. When they figured out that worked and they can have a baby, then they duplicated that experiment over and over and over again. They made a lot of Adams through the same process. Not Adam having babies with Eve, but them creating new Adams and new Eves and having them live in this Eden, E-D-I-N, which was located in Mesopotamia, which is now modern day Iraq, according to the tablets, not according to Billy Carson. And in this mating area, they had certain specific times they could and couldn't mate. And if you violated that, you would be punished. So they were cattle. They were like cattle. And that's why when Enki comes and sneaks up into the garden and starts giving them knowledge, that was the snake. And Lil comes back and discovers that they had to gain some knowledge about themselves and realize that they weren't animals, that they were sentient beings. He gets pissed off and calls his brother a snake in the tablets, you see? Unlike the debate between Sumer and Winter, Cain and Abel do not reconcile. It is a story that teaches us about the consequences of our actions, human fallibility, and so forth and so on. So basically, it's a remix of ancient stories. All this is remixed stuff, you see? The Sumerian tablets. The oldest tablet recorded dates back to around 2300 BCE, but the story is likely much, much older. We're talking about tens of thousands of years old, because now we have found tablets that are much older than 2300 BCE, okay? It's polytheistic, multiple gods, has many recorded creation stories that are often incomplete because of broken tablets and such. But ironically, the parts that weren't broken make it into the Bible. Interesting. Then you have the Sumerian tradition, which includes the Great Flood story, Genesis. Ziusudra is rewarded with eternal life. The Sumerians wrote many debate stories called disputations, which mimic Cain and Abel's story. And you look at the book of Genesis, there's side-by-side comparison. You see the comparisons there. You see the slight remixing going on. You see that the text that made it into that part of Genesis was mostly just plagiarized text from ancient tablets, which then were slightly remixed in some cases, but ultimately come from ancient text. Very important stuff. Very, very important stuff. And so why is it important to know this? Because it's important to know and understand who you are and where you came from, how we got here, and what happened in the ancient past. Because until we find out what really happened in the ancient past, we can't plan for a better future, because the past is prologue. We're in a loop. This stuff keeps happening over and over and over again. We keep going through this vicious cycle of rise and fall of civilizations. We keep going through this vicious cycle of situations that happened in the past reappearing on our timeline and happening over and over again. See, if you go back in time to 2023 BCE, you'll find the same exact stuff we're going through now happening back then. Not necessarily with the technology level, but with the social issues. You'll find it. Every section, every era of time that you have in our current era, match and go back and study history for that previous area in BCE, you'll find the same stuff happening. It's like we're in a time loop. We keep doing it over and over and over and over again. Until we understand and know this kind of stuff, until we dig deep into the information that we've been fed and forced to analyze it, break it apart, rip it apart, and put it back together again, until then, we'll continue to go through this vicious cycle of rise and fall of civilizations, rise and fall of awareness and knowledge, and ascension wisdom. We'll keep getting to a certain point and falling right back down again. At some point, we got to learn how to walk, and then we got to learn how to run. The Anunnaki actually are not gone. They're still here. If you look at the text, you discover there was a second pyramid war which occurred between Amun-Ra and his relatives. Some fled and some stayed. They actually dropped what they called, listen to this, weapons of mass destruction on this planet. WMDs. Yeah, in ancient times. You thought George Bush Jr. came up with that term for the Iraq War? Where do you think he got it from? The tablets. And in this dropping of these weapons, it created something called an evil wind in the text. And then this evil wind, whoever was in it, where this evil wind was moving, we're talking about nuclear fallout of some type, radiation fallout. People's fingernails were falling off, their hair was falling out, their nose and eyes were bleeding. This is all symbols, their skin was boiling. This is all signs of radiation sickness. And when you look at the region that it was talked about being dropped in, you find the Mohenjo-Daro in the Indus Valley. You find the Giza Plateau and many other areas around the region where sand and buildings were vitrified and turned into glass. Matter of fact, in the Indus Valley, bodies are still laying in the street. Google Indus Valley, Mohenjo-Daro. You'll see bodies laying in the street, holding hands, just the skeletons that have never, ever been eaten by any wild animals because they're radiated. So we know that there was a nuclear war of some type in the ancient past. In this text, some of these beings fled to safe areas and some left, and their bloodline is walking amongst us this very day. So in some ways, genetically, they never left. And all of us, including every single human on this planet, has a little touch of that DNA in our body. Any Homo sapiens sapien has a little slight touch of that DNA in our body. So in essence, we're all here. They're watching us and they're monitoring us to see how far we're going to go and if we're going to become a rival of them.